We planned that. And Chris, I'd like to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Kateri. Great to see everybody, or your icons or your names. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with you lessons that I have learned about what it takes to sustain community collaboratives to achieve the change we want in the communities that we care about. Today's presentation is really a preview for a workshop that we're going to be doing in person on Halloween morning. So hopefully there'll be more treats than tricks during that workshop. My hope is that this will be, the content that I'll share today will be intriguing enough that you say, hey, I want to do more. I want to learn more about how to collaborate well in our community, and that you'll sign up and register for the October 31st workshop. The lessons that I've learned are through work in 8 different states, dozens of different collaboratives. Most of my work has been done in Northeast Ohio, just across the border from Sharon. I live south of Cleveland, and spend a fair amount of time in the Mahoning Valley as well, where I've had several clients over the years. So I'm going to start sharing my screen right now. So this is a PowerPoint presentation. You'll get a copy of it as well as the recording for this. Please feel free to interrupt. I'm going to ask throughout it if you have questions. If you have a ton of questions, that would make me very happy and make it challenging to get through everything in an hour, but that's okay with me. So it's kind of hard to do a conversation with this many people on a Zoom call, but I'm up for trying. If there's something here that you say, hey, let's dig in a little bit deeper, I'm glad to take the time to do so. And now we're going to see if Chris can actually share his screen. I hope someone will let me know, Kateri or somebody will let me know if it's not working, but hopefully you see this slide that says building a community culture of collaboration. And I think building that kind of culture is critical to achieving the change we want, but it's not an easy task. So today I want to just share with you what it takes to collaborate more. And in my experience, we're often told to collaborate more by our bosses, maybe by our spouse, maybe by a colleague or a dear friend. But rarely are we told what collaboration is, why we should do it, who should be doing it, when it's possible, and how to do it. Again, it's a term that we use a lot, but as Kateri referenced, don't dig into very often. And I've kind of made it my career to dig into it as much as possible. So I'm going to try to cover the what, why, who, when, and how of collaboration in the next 50 minutes or so. But I want to start with a huge caution, a warning. Don't collaborate. Please don't do it. I mean it. As a collaboration consultant, don't collaborate unless you absolutely have to. If you can get the change you want in your community without collaborating, please do so. Collaboration is hard work. It takes time. It takes resources. It takes energy. And if you can achieve the change you want without creating a collaborative, I hope you will do that, right? But sometimes we can't achieve the change we want without working with others. And that then, requires us to collaborate. And to answer the question, what is it to collaborate? So I'm the collaboration consultant in the room. This is my definition of what collaboration is. It's when diverse, independent, yet interdependent players share power and responsibility for achieving a shared purpose. By diverse, I mean they reflect the community. And again, my presentation is around community-oriented collaboratives. You may need to collaborate within your organization. You may need to collaborate within your home. You may need to collaborate with some work colleagues, but this even across organizations. But when it's community oriented is what we're going to be focusing on today. So the players are diverse. They reflect the diversity of our communities. They're both independent and interdependent. The mayor doesn't really get to tell the county commissioners what to do. The business leader doesn't tell the Buell Foundation what to do, right? But how well we work together has great influence over what we might be able to do together. If we're going to collaborate, that means no single person is in control. Indeed, we all have to share power to make decisions together and to share responsibility for the progress we're making towards a shared purpose. I'm going to talk a bit more about this notion of shared purpose, but I'm just going to say questions, observations about this definition of collaboration. And I can't see my full screen, so Kateri, I'll trust you. If you see a hand raised or somebody who just wants to interrupt, trust me, I can handle it, okay? Interruptions are welcome. So let's dig into the why of collaboration. What is this shared purpose that should bring us together at a table to work together on it? Well, in my experience, there's about 5 levels of shared purpose that we might have in our community. The most basic level, it's to learn together. So for example, I'm presently working with a collaborative in a community in Texas where they've formed a learning network to learn learn about issues related to college and career readiness, because they want every high school student in their community to have a college or career or military plan by the time they graduate from high school. So they're coming to a table to learn together about those issues around college and career readiness. Sometimes learning isn't enough. They want to do even more together. So I've worked with food pantries that have shared resources such as warehouses and transportation resources in order to improve their ability to serve their community. I've worked with farmers markets who are part of a healthy food initiative in their community, and they've worked together to align the schedules of their farmers markets so that they're not competing with each other as to who's providing a farmers market opportunity in a particular neighborhood on Saturday versus a Thursday afternoon, right? And they're working together to try to increase the availability of healthy food. That's their shared purpose. And they're willing to change their schedules and align their schedules so that they can better serve the neighborhoods that they're working in. And just coordinating schedules might not be enough for us. We really want to go even deeper. And so I've worked with, for example, a workforce collaborative that discovered that preparing adults for work wasn't the only thing they needed to do if they wanted to address the workforce challenges in their community. Because those adults were struggling with getting the transportation they needed to get to the job. And they were struggling with getting access to childcare that would allow them to take the job, right? So they thought they were in the workforce training business, but to get the outcomes they wanted together, they needed to broaden their work together to include transportation providers and childcare providers, something that those kind of people weren't at their table originally when they started learning about workforce. But when they decided they needed to elevate their outcomes, they had to bring these other players to the table. And the highest level of collaboration, the highest purpose, is to transform, to make it so that there's no longer hunger in our community, but we're working for food security. What would it take to disrupt the status quo in our community? How will I need to change my behavior? How will others need to change theirs so that we have a more equitable community, right? That kind of transformation is the highest level of collaboration. Truly very difficult to achieve. Many of the problems that we're dealing with, they're often referred to as wicked problems because they've persisted for decades. And I'll talk about how some communities are pursuing transformation on issues that have plagued them for decades. That's the why, and the different kinds of shared purposes that might bring us to a community table to collaborate together. Doing all right? Questions, concerns? My next in the list of who, what, when, where, why is the who. There are basically two kinds of players who need to collaborate at the community level. You see 4 on the screen, so you're wondering, okay, what's he talking about when he says there's only 2? The most important ones are the primary actors, the individuals and or businesses that we're trying to serve through our collaborative. So for example, a food security collaborative should involve people who are suffering and dealing with food insecurity. Those are the primary actors. They're the folks who are at the heart of our shared purpose. The rest of the actors, we might call them supporting actors, are the service providers, the funders, the policymakers, who have great influence over these systems that deal with food security or education or health or safety or whatever it might be, but they're not the primary actors. And one of the lessons that I've learned is if you want to sustain a strong collaborative culture in your community, is you'll make sure the collaboratives that you build have primary actors at the table alongside the supporting actors, the service providers, the funders, the policymakers. Indeed, in my first work in collaboratives, I was primarily working with funders of collaboratives. And not all of those funders knew what it took to invite the primary actors to their table because they struggled with the power dynamics that were created there. But if we're going to collaborate well in our communities, we need the supporting actors and the primary actors to be at the table together, and both belong at the table. The next step in the journey is asking the question, when is it possible? And in my experience, it's rarely possible. And when possible, nearly impossible to achieve. The kind of collaboration that leads to transformation. Learning collaboratives, very possible. And almost in any community can at least do a learning collaborative. But that transformation type of collaboration, very rare, very difficult, but doesn't mean we shouldn't try for it, because that's what we want. We want to achieve a more equitable community. That's what we need to do. And hopefully the stories I'm sharing with you today will give you some confidence that even though I emphasize how difficult this work is, it is possible. And most importantly, it's necessary to achieve the change we want. It's 3 big criteria that I look for to say, okay, is this community eager enough, willing enough, able enough to collaborate at a high level? Is there a cause that unites key players? I referenced earlier that some of the problems that persist in our community have done so for decades. One example that I'll be sharing is around infant mortality. In a community where I've worked, it's been an issue, a publicly known issue that's gotten a lot of attention for over 5 decades, right? But it really wasn't until about 6-7 years ago that a group of leaders said, we can't tolerate this anymore. We have to address it. We just can't complain about it. And they recognized that it wasn't just an issue for the health community. It was an issue for the public sector, the private sector, the philanthropic sector, grassroots, grass tops, everybody needed to be at the table to work on it. And as leaders, they needed to exercise high levels of leadership. And I'm going to spend some time talking about what that kind of leadership looks like, because without it, your collaboration will never get beyond a made-up word that I don't think I'll need to explain to you, and that is collaboration. We've experienced a lot of collaboration probably in our lives. I'm hopeful that what I'm sharing with you will help you develop a high level of collaboration in your community, in Mercer County and beyond. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, take a drink, and see if Kateri's got any questions, comments, things flowing. All right, I hope I haven't put you to sleep. This is the hard part about Zoom. I hope I still have your attention. All right, so there's 4 keys to the how, and I mentioned the first one already, leadership, and we'll dig in on that a little bit more. And then we need to have the structures that help us come together at a table to share our perspectives and to make decisions together. And we need the support needed to do that. And I'm going to talk about each one of those. And again, leadership is the most important one. And it's an unusual kind of leadership. Often we confuse authority with leadership. There's not a lot of authority in a collaborative space. As I said before, the mayor doesn't get to tell county officials what to do and vice versa, right? We're in this together, so we have to figure out what it takes to move forward together. And the best kind of leadership is when we change our own behavior in ways that inspire others to do the same. When funders stop funding things that aren't working but are their pet projects and focus on things that have a demonstrated, proven outcome to get the change we want. Okay? And when we use our influence to encourage others to change as well, and build a culture of shared learning, responsibility, and power, and we persist on it. So I'm going to go back to that infant mortality conversation, right? Since the 1970s, this community has known that not only they have a high infant mortality rate, Black babies are many times more likely to die before their first birthday than white babies. And it wasn't until a group of leaders, including mothers who suffered the loss of a baby in their first year of life, came together to say, we have to start learning about this and better understand what's going on, that they were able to make some meaningful progress. And I'll share some more examples of that in a moment. But it's a very high level of leadership. Again, it's not being in control. It's not telling people what to do. But it's about changing our own behaviors in ways that inspire others. And it requires us to exercise 5 incredibly important skills. Facilitation. How do we move forward together? I worked in a community where manufacturers complained about workforce for a long time, that the kids coming out of high school weren't ready to work in their manufacturing plants. And they would, every 2 or 3 years, like clockwork, they would convene a meeting and complain, and nothing would move forward. All they did was complain. It wasn't until a leader came to them and said, how about if I convene some meetings among you as manufacturers and the educators in our communities and some of the social service providers to see how we might move forward together? Did they get beyond, the complaining stage? Evaluation, assessing how well we work together. right? I worked in a community that had 24 different economic development organizations. And the community was still, despite that large number of economic development organizations, the community was disappointed with the level of economic growth in the community. And a leader of one of the key organizations decided to evaluate how well those organizations worked together. Not what they worked on together, but how well did they work together? And through that evaluation process, they learned that they didn't work together at all. What they did was they tried to tell each other what to do, which really isn't working together. It's just bossing people around. So that leader started to shift his organization. So a key factor in their performance evaluation was how well did they work with the other economic development organizations. And that has led to a change in culture in the community and more than a tenfold increase in their economic development outcomes, because the how is just as important as the what of this work. Understanding context. We have to understand what is going on in our community and why, rather than carrying with us the assumptions that we have. So that community I mentioned with an infant mortality problem, for decades, they told themselves that one of the reasons they had an infant mortality problem was young mothers, children were having children. Children were having babies. That was the story they told themselves for decades. Turns out, not a single baby that died in its first year of life was born to a teenage mother. Now, they weren't necessarily born healthy, not suggesting that there aren't other issues with teenage pregnancy that might be worthy of a collaborative, but infant mortality wasn't one of those issues. There were other issues that were causing the infant mortality, including structural racism that was hurting the ability of well-educated, well-cared for African-American mothers to give birth to healthy enough babies that they would celebrate their first birthday. Instead of talking about babies having babies, they had to shift their conversation to being about why is it that well-educated, well-cared for African-American women in our community are unable to bring a healthy baby into the world to celebrate their first birthday. That's a much different conversation. And it took them to really dig into the data to begin to see what was really going on in their community. They had to start asking new compelling questions, practicing inquiry, right? Inquiry helps us set aside the assumptions that we carry with us and explore new opportunities to make change in the community that matter. Excuse me. And we need to, as leaders, we really need to work on trust. A colleague of mine says of trust that it's kind of like the air we breathe. We don't think about it too much until it gets polluted, right? But we have to think hard about what it takes to build trust. I had the opportunity to work with a collaborative leader who was supporting an education collaborative in their community. The mission of it was to elevate the education outcomes in their county, a county with at least 17 different school districts, plus obviously a lot of other private schools. And he felt firmly that if they had data that helped them understand student level data, that helped them understand what was working, they would be able to apply what was working more broadly across the community and elevate those outcomes. But it would require those individual school districts to share their data with him and his organization as the intermediary, the supporter of this work. And they were reluctant to do so. They didn't trust him. He was new to town, right? It was a new effort. And so he took months to get to know the school superintendents and others who would need to share their data, and began to try to understand what it would take for them to trust that this organization would be able to help them with the data. He quickly learned that they would really like to have student level data that was aggregated beyond their school district that would help them have a better pulse on what was going on in education in their community. But they also learned that they weren't going to share the data unless he committed to not using it against them. They did not want him to use the data in a way that would make them look bad. They were more than willing to use the data to improve their performance, but they didn't want it to be used to say your school district is worse than the school district next door, or whatever, however it could be used kind of as a hammer rather than as a flashlight. So he entered into agreements with the school districts that were very clear as to how the data was to be used. He talked 15 of the 17 school districts into joining a data sharing agreement. Pretty good at building trust, 15 out of 17. And the other 2 joined within a few months later, because who wants to be the 2 sitting out when there's 15 other people sitting at the party table, right? But it took a lot of trust building. These 5 skills need to be put into practice on a daily basis by us as leaders in our community if we want to be able to collaborate and achieve our shared purpose. When we start working on these skills, we soon discover we need to organize our ability to work this way. And I refer to this as the structures. They might be committees, they might be even new organizations, but usually they're committees, advisory committees, steering committees, those kinds of things that organize the members so that they can maximize their outcomes together. If you're a learning collaborative, you probably don't need a lot of structure. I'd be stunned to find out you do need a lot. But if you're working on transformation, you probably need some more structure. And these structures shouldn't be created to solve the problems and make it so, oh, we created that committee, they're going to work on it. No, it's our committee, we're going to work on it. So these structures need to be designed in ways that reinforce this shared responsibility. And these structures should help us make decisions together. Really basic questions like, how do we decide? How to decide become critically important when we're bringing diverse stakeholders together to make decisions together, right? When we're making a decision within our organization, that's pretty straightforward. Who's ever in charge makes the decision. In a collaborative, nobody is in charge. So we have to make a decision together. And this can be a struggle. So we have to get good at figuring out what can we make decisions about collectively and what can't we? And who decides how we decide? All, again, fundamental questions that need to be addressed and can be challenging to address, but it's easier to make decisions together if we have people helping us. And so there needs to be this support capacity for our collaboration efforts. Again, the level of capacity to help us collaborate together varies based on our shared purpose. A learning collaborative may not need a lot of capacity, but someone's going to at least have to convene the meeting, right? And if it's an in-person meeting rather than a Zoom meeting, you're going to need to have coffee and donuts or something, right? Somebody's going to have to arrange for the meeting facility. Okay. And if you're working on transformation, you need a lot more capacity. Capacity that can facilitate the conversation, can facilitate meetings, facilitate the work, coordinate the work, capture what we're learning through the work, translate all of that data that we can be collecting in the case of those school districts, or in the case of infant mortality, understanding why each baby in our community died before their first birthday, and turning that data into insight and learning that we can then communicate more broadly to the community to catalyze even more change. And when it comes to collaboration, communication is critical. I spent 20 years in the communications business before I fell into the collaboration business. And I'm sure you know how hard it is to communicate within your own organization. Communicating across organizations, very challenging. You need to have some resources if you're going to communicate with those primary actors and all of those supporting actors in your collaboration. And the more ambitious your collaboration, the more you have to advocate for not for yourself, but for the shared purpose that you're working on. All right, so by now, you've probably been hit pretty hard by the Chris Thompson collaboration fire hose, and you're saying, this is a bit overwhelming. If I want to collaborate more, where do I start? Okay. I hope you will start by asking some questions. I said earlier that one of the most important skills is inquiry, asking new, compelling questions and listening deeply to the responses that are generated so we can work together to achieve change. So here's 3 questions that I hope you'll be asking, or if you find yourself asking, I hope you'll dig in more on this area of collaboration. That first question that I have up there, why, despite all of our best efforts, are we still disappointed with the current state in our community? That's an important question to ask, but it's not one I really want you to dwell on. But if you find yourself asking that question about any issue in your community, whether it's health, safety, education, the quality of the environment, I hope you'll dig in on that second question even more. How will we feel if we really get good in our community at collaborating and creating an environment where all of our residents can thrive? How will we feel? I think you'd feel really great. And that question hopefully will lead to the third question. What's it take? I've given you just a glimpse as to what it takes, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of this. But if you want to dig in deeper into what it will take, that's what our workshop is for on Halloween morning from 9 to noon. We'll get you home in time for trick-or-treating, promise, at Penn State Shenango Auditorium. We're going to dig deeper into the skills, give you a few tools and tactics that you can use to strengthen those skills. And we'll talk about what it takes to design an effective collaborative in our community. The foundation asks that you register by October 19th. You should have all gotten an invitation already, so maybe some of you already have registered. You can use the QR code on the screen if you want to hold your phone up to it. You will also get a copy of this presentation from Kateri in a little bit, so you can do it that way as well. And so at this point, I'm going to ask for questions. And I really hope there are some, and I'll keep the slides up, or I'll make it so I can easily put them back up if there's a particular issue that you want to cover.
Chris, this is Samantha McCandless. Where would you recommend starting to build that trust? I'm in agreement with you as far as the communication goes, but if you can't build those bridges of trust, then it doesn't matter. You know, you can do everything underneath the sun.
Samantha, thank you very much for that very good question. How do we start building trust? I think one of the things you first have to do some assessing from your own perspective of whether you think the community has a high level of trust, low level of trust, something in between, or the worst case scenario, active distrust, right? There's lots of history in all of our communities and some of that history may lead to people not trusting each other or not trusting particular institutions or particular individuals. And then after that assessment, the question is that we need to ask ourselves is, who do we want to build trust with? I'm going to quote a woman, her name is Kirsten Toth. She works at a foundation over in Akron, Ohio. And she had a wonderful observation, and that is that trust is built one-to-one. It's not built in group settings. So if you convene a bunch of players who don't really trust each other, and you expect simply by bringing them together and talking about the importance of trust, that suddenly that's going to build trust, in my experience, that just fuels some passive aggressive behavior where everybody is really nice in the meeting and they go back in the parking lot and complain about each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that was a confirmational nod, right? So it takes a lot of one-to-one conversations that you have to have with others that basically go answer the question, what will it take for me to build more trust with you? What will it take for you to build more trust with a third party? And you as a leader to think about how you might go about doing that. It is, I think, the hardest part of this work is when the community does not have a decent level of trust across sectors. Collaboration moves at the speed of trust. If you don't have the trust, you can't go very far. And that one-to-one relationship building is huge.
Thank you, Chris. At the workshop that you're having on Halloween, is that something that you guys are going to dive a little deeper in?
Yes, we will devote, hold me to this, okay? We will devote a whole section to how do we build trust? And what we do is what I share are some of the elements of trust. So what makes us trustworthy? And how do those elements influence our ability to be trustworthy as well as to trust others? So we'll dig in on that. And hopefully, though, that exercise that we do will provide you with some tools and tactics that you can use to think more deeply about trust and to start to build trust.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Other questions, comments, observations?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Warren?
Yeah, Warren. Yeah, I'm here by way of the Life Center here, Bethel Life, Ben Zimmer and the crew. So when I hear you talk about collaborations, I mean, one of the things, it started for me back in the city of Philadelphia back in the 90s. For instance, we had a genuine concern with the homeless shelter community. The shelters at that time had been providing, a place for people to sleep and to eat. But there was a common concern with the fact that a large percentage of the people who were homeless in the city of Philadelphia were suffering from substance abuse problems,
Yeah.
And so the purpose of building collaborations then, first of all, when and I'll just say this from experience, when you build collaborations, you want to do your research. You want to start looking at agencies or organizations that have a tremendous track record, who have been consistent over the years.
Yes.
You want to deal with organizations. Matter of fact, that in itself says there's somebody that I can possibly trust a lot to make sure that the initiative gets addressed. And so the general concern was, how can we bring into the shelter system some resources that will enable us to render effective, for instance, outpatient treatment to a lot of the people who were struggling with homelessness. And so we did. The purpose of building collaborations is not to duplicate a program. I don't want to put together another program if it already exists and it has a successful track record within my community. And more than anything in the world, I want to build collaborations with organizations that will literally render a service that not only will not be duplicated, but that will enable them to benefit as well, as far as pouring into the incentive or the initiative. And so that's the way it's always worked for me.
Yeah, Warren, thank you very much for raising that. One of the lessons that I have learned is that if you want a failed collaborative, ask a handful of mediocre organizations to collaborate.
Mhm.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and you'll find yourself more frustrated.
Yeah. And
Number
also,
one, and then you'll wonder why, after maybe 60, 90 days, the whole initiative has collapsed.
yeah.
And nobody's buying into it.
And so again, Kateri and the team at the foundation know this about me, right? Funders have a huge responsibility in this work, right? To create the resources, whether you're a public funder, private philanthropic, doesn't matter to me. Hopefully all three of them working together. And I often say that the first step in building a collaborative is providing the operating support for high performing organizations, right? And we, instead of, asking resource constrained and challenged organizations to collaborate, we as funders should ask the question, what will it take for us to build 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever the number is, really high performing organizations in our community, and then ask them to collaborate in the way that you said, that we're not duplicating capacity, we're not replicating capacity, we're building our community's capacity to better serve the primary actors in our community.
And it also matters. It matters that even when you approach collaborations, that you have some type of agenda, a curriculum, something that people can use to focus on the initiative.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Be clear about that shared purpose, right? That's your agenda, that shared purpose. And if people come to your meeting and everyone has a different purpose for being there, it's not going to work very well.
Won't work at all. It has to be a focal point.
Yeah. And again, it's hard to do this work well, but when you have that focal point, when you have that shared purpose and you have high performing organizations at the table, and you're truly focused on that shared purpose, that's when, communities make meaningful, measurable progress on eliminating the disparities that bring us to those tables in the first place.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely true. And to keep from, and because you're going to run into it, there's going to be, or there could be, some power struggles in the midst of it.
Power dynamics. Yes, indeed.
But the thing is, though, if you can help your collaboratives to understand the part that they're playing in the initiative, everybody, in a sense, becomes a leader within its own realm, and we can all bring those resources together and hopefully succeed in what we're challenged to accomplish.
Well, Warren, you raised, the important word power and trust, the first question, right? Go hand in hand, right?
Yes, they do.
High communities where there's a high degree of trust tend to have a healthier power dynamic, right? Why do we have distrust in communities? Well, we've seen people use power to their own benefit or to protect an inequitable status quo, right? So explicitly talking about power is critical in a community collaborative. Power shared is collaboration, and we can do a much better job with our collaboratives if we address the power dynamics in our community.
Yeah. And it's as simple as acknowledging the strengths of the collaborative and making sure that we don't overstep our boundaries in trying to what they're bringing to the collaborative. Respect what they have.
Yeah.
And let's see how we can bring all that stuff together to a form, like, here it is again, to serve the purpose at hand.
Yeah, and one of the things, Warren, you're getting at is the ability to develop some shared principles, right? That we will honor the gifts that we each bring to the table, right? That we will do our best to not step into other people's lanes, so to speak. But we'll also recognize that these lanes that we have in our community, these boundaries that we have, they're all artificial. And as long as we're focused on what's best for the community, we can live with other people being in our lanes, as long as we're treating each other well and staying focused on that goal. Other questions?
We have a hand raised and we have a question in the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna have to put my glasses on then. What is the best way to find individuals you trust in order to begin the collaboration process? Well, Sarah, good question. I think it goes back a little bit to the first question I said and where to start. Why, despite all of our best efforts, are we still disappointed with the current state in our community? And whether that's an issue regarding homelessness or mental health care, whatever the current state is you're referring to. If you're asking that question, I think you should just reflect on who else you think is asking that question. Right? I've yet to find a community where someone wanted to catalyze change and they're the only one who really wanted that change to happen. Right? Usually there's a group of people, like-minded folks. Maybe they don't know each other yet, right? Maybe they're, in different parts of the community, different sectors. But if we're listening well, I think you'll hear people asking that question with, obviously using different words. And those are the kinds of folks that I would begin with. Listening to folks who are asking new questions rather than old rotten questions that kind of reinforce the status quo is the way to find those first individuals. And I don't see the hand up, so I'm going to say, if you've raised your hand, let's unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Chris. It's Tracy Schleep.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, good to see you again.
Yes.
So I have an additional perspective to comment on Mr. Earl's posing question. And it ties into Sarah Wright's question that she just asked. We're talking about high-performing organizations and making sure that that they are included in this process, and I don't disagree with that at all. But I would also ask, how do we include those organizations or those individuals who would be high performing or could be high performing, but have never been asked to the table before or have been drowned out by the power struggles that do often occur during these meetings?
Yeah. Okay. Tracy.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I mean, consistency and a track record. I mean, all that stuff is attractive. The question is, how does the community embrace the service that's being offered? Because we've had some small and large. I mean, just because you're a big organization doesn't mean you best fit the initiative. If you don't have the compassion or the empathy, if you don't, if you're not able to relate to the culture, I mean, like I said, this is where the research comes in. You have to see who best serves the initiative with their resource and with their service, and most importantly, with their compassion and empathy for the circumstance or the cause at hand.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of smaller organizations and agencies really who are very adamant and very passionate about what they do, and they stand out. Trust me, and you'll know who to invite at that point.
Yeah, and Tracy, what I would add is, so I said, you want a failed collaboration, ask some mediocre organizations to the table, and that we should only really invite high performing organizations, which is a reflection of the fact that I'm a consultant and therefore I live in fantasy land, right? Where it's an either or. So more precise language would have been organizations that aspire to be high performing. And going back to Warren's point, we can tell whether they aspire over time. We can learn that. But how do we help those? What do we do with those organizations and even those sectors of the community that have kind of been neglected as part of your question as well, right? That I could have a high performing organization, but no one cares about my neighborhood. So I'm not going to get the funding support I need to be high performing.
Yes, Chris, exactly.
So this is where I go on my funders rant, for lack of a better term. The funders that support this work have to do the research, understand the context, and assess what is their role in perpetuating this dynamic, right? There's a colleague in this work, a great thinker, his name is Vule. He runs a website called Nonprofit AF, and he's coined the term philanthropic hunger games, right? This is a game that philanthropy can play where they use their funding dollars to pit nonprofits against each other, right? To see who can survive and who can endure, right? I can't judge, how much of a hunger game culture there is in your community because I haven't spent enough time there. But I've been in plenty of communities where funders have gotten rid of that culture and they've become much more transparent about the funding decisions they make. And most importantly, that funders sit down together as funders and talk about these issues and address the power dynamics and all of those other things. So Tracy, what you're getting at is part of my framing that this work is rarely possible, and when possible, nearly impossible to achieve. Because if you have active distrust, or you have funders who are not open to changing their behavior, it doesn't change. Change doesn't happen just because we want it to. We need to each change our own behavior. And I always say those with the most power need to change their behavior the most.
We have another question.
Yeah, Lizette?
Yeah, it's less a question, more a reflection on what we're dealing with, because we are Mercer County. It's not like we have an abundance of money looking to be thrown at our community. Most of our local funding really is Buell Regional and the Community Foundation, and to a much lesser extent, the United Way model. I think some of the challenges we see is more an inertia among organizations than any kind of interest in aspiring up or down. I just don't think there's any understanding of collaboration other than, like when we would do grants and you have MOUs and you have collaborative letters and people, oh yeah, we'll refer, oh yeah, we'll do this. But it's right now, I think community-wide, it's pretty low bar. So hopefully with this initiative sponsored by the foundation, we can begin to at least percolate or fertilize the nonprofit community to think and reach higher up so that we can begin to have an impact and not have so much of it just called in, just on, that's just the way we've done things since 1972.
Or 1272.
Yeah.
Lizette, I want to be clear. I don't know Mercer County well, right? I've driven through it. I've been to one meeting there. I spend a lot of time in Western PA because when I'm not, to recover from the rigors of collaboration, I fly fish. So that's what I
Oh,
do.
wow.
So I spend a lot of time in your neighborhood, right? But I did some work a few years ago before the pandemic in another community in York where a nonprofit and religious leader asked a very compelling question that I'd like to share with you and encourage you all to reflect on. And the question was, what if we all agreed that there are ample resources in our community to achieve the change we want? What if we all agreed there are ample resources in our community to achieve the change we want? It's an important question that we should spend some time asking and exploring the potential answers to that question, regardless of our understanding of our relative wealth. And I also, you listed off a couple funders, right? There's also all of the funders from the public sector, and there's funders from the private community, including the United Way, which is a private sector funder, that can come to those tables as well. And in the healthiest communities that I work in, the funders do come to a table and talk as funders, right? Some government officials don't bring a funder's mentality to the table. They bring a politician's mentality to the table, or a bureaucrat's mentality, or a program office, a program implementer, right? But we ask them to put on their funder's hat. Again, I don't know Mercer well enough, but I think every community can ask that question. We got, I think, 2 more minutes. I have to put my glasses back on. 1 more minute. So I'm going to take one last question and promise a short answer before I turn it over to Kateri.
I am not noticing any hands up.
All right.
Or
So
any.
I look forward to seeing as many of you who can come on Halloween morning. I'll be dressed up as a collaboration consultant. It's a scary costume.
And I just want to remind everyone, if you didn't scan the QR code, the RSVP is on our website. We are looking to have all registrations in by the 19th. Website is buellregionalhealthfoundation.org. And that is where we are also looking to, thank you, put on the recording of this presentation. Chris, I want to thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks to keep working through collaboration skills and developing those skills. And I want to thank everyone who did come on today. It's been wonderful dialogue and getting to see different faces. It's been really exciting. So thank you all and hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thank you.